Here are 10 more things I wish I'd known when I started using Keyboard Maestro over half a decade ago. These tips and tricks will help you make better macros, and better macros will help you stop wasting time on your work. Beginning with tip number 1, which is to start editing macros. So whenever you open Keyboard Maestro for the first time, or you open it after an upgrade, often it will look like this, and there's no way to edit macros. So if you click on macros, you can't see the actions directly and you can't see the triggers. So tip number 1 is to start editing macros. And the way you can do that is by double clicking on a macro or by pressing this edit button down here, which will toggle whether you are in edit mode or not. But now that we are in edit mode, let's start making a macro. So let me delete this macro here and I'm going to create a new one. And I want to show you a task that I want to create a macro for. So oftentimes whenever I am in different applications, there are certain terms that I want to look up on YouTube. So I'll come and copy a term, then I'll open a new private window and go to YouTube. And I'm doing a private window because I don't want it to change my main recommendations. And then I'll paste in the search term up here and press enter. And then I can watch the videos that are relevant to that topic. So there were several steps we did there. And let's think about how we can make a macro to streamline that process of looking up a term in a new YouTube window. So I'm going to close out this window and go back to Keyboard Maestro. So maybe let's call this macro something like search highlighted text on YouTube, and I'll add a hotkey trigger, maybe something like Control-Option-Y for YouTube. And now let's think about the actions that we want to start adding. So the first action that we did is copying some text. So back in Keyboard Maestro, I'm going to search for type a keystroke and press Command C since we want to copy. But this actually brings us to tip number 2, which is to think about using the copy action instead of typing a keystroke of Command C. So Command C will just type that keystroke as is, but the copy action will actually add some small delays so that the app can process that you copied something. So sometimes in certain apps, if you just have a Command C action, the clipboard will not register that anything has changed before the actions below start to run. So whenever you can, it's often a good idea to use the copy action instead of the type a keystroke action. Now we have the first step in our macro. We copy whatever text is highlighted. And then the next step is to open a new private window. So there's actually a menu item for this. It's the new private window menu item. So whenever I press that, it'll open up this new private window in my browser. So that brings us to tip number 3, which is to use the select or show a menu item action to activate menu items. So once you add this action, then you can come over to menu, and then you can go to whatever app you want to activate the menu from. So in this case, it's Brave browser, and we're going File, New Private Window. And so now that gets added to this action here. So now let's take a look at what this macro does. Let me select a term, and I'll press the shortcut Control-Option-Y. And you can see it opens a new private window. And if I were to press Command V to paste manually, you can see it pastes in the text that was highlighted. So it looks like it's working, and now we know the next step is to open YouTube. We'll get to that in just a second, but first, if you want me to personally make you macros like this to save you 100+ hours a year, you can book a free call with me using the top link in the description of this video. But now let's add an action to set the front browser URL. So this action here, set front browser URL, I'm going to add that. And now this is tip number 4. This action will allow us to set the URL of whatever tab is frontmost in the browser. So in this case, we know we want to go to youtube.com. So let me type that in here. And now let's test out our action and test out the macro, I should say. I'll press the shortcut Control-Option-Y, and you can see it opens up YouTube in a private window. And if I were to paste, you you can see it contains the system clipboard, the item that we copied. So we know that the macro at this point will bring us to a private window with YouTube at the front. And now let's think about what actions we would need to enter that search term. So I know in YouTube there's a keyboard shortcut. If you press the backslash, it will automatically select or highlight the search bar. So you can see if I press backslash, it highlights it. And then we would want to press Command V to paste in the item that we copied. So let's go back to Keyboard Maestro. I'll add the type a keystroke action. And the first one we said was backslash. And the second one was Command V to paste. So now we have these actions in our macro, and that brings us to tip number 5, which is that you can press the run button up here to test all of the actions in your macro. So I'm going to, maybe I'll just copy this term here and press run. And you can see it opens up YouTube, and if I paste, it contains that term. However, it looks like the macro failed at some point because it did not actually highlight the search bar. We can test it one more time if we run it. We run, and it doesn't highlight the search bar or paste in the term like it was supposed to. So let's take a look at the macro and see what we need to fix. And by the way, you can download the finished version of this macro in the description below. If you click the link and put your email in, you'll get the macro straight in your inbox. And I'll also send 5 more tips completely for free. But at this point, it looks like there's probably something going wrong here. It takes the browser a second to finish loading, and by the time it's done loading, these actions have already run. So I've talked about in previous videos how you can use the wait for front browser to finish loading action. So this will just wait until the page loads before it runs the actions below it. But I want to talk about some different ways to add pauses. And that brings us to tip number 6, which is the difference between the delay and pause action. So often when people want to add a delay, this is a very common beginner mistake. They'll add this set delay action here. Now, what this set delay action does is it lets you select a delay between actions. So you could set the delay between actions to be something like 0.5 seconds. And people will mistakenly think that this adds a 0.5 second delay between this action and this action. In fact, what this action does is it adds a delay between all of the actions below it. So if you were to put this at the start of a macro, then it would add a half-second delay between every single action in the macro. So let's run it, and you can see it's running very slowly. It's adding a delay between each of the actions, which in this case actually helped because it did give enough time for the browser to load before it tried to select the search bar and paste it in the copied text, but it made the macro very slow, which is not what we want. So instead of using the delay action, often you will want to use the pause action instead. So pause, and we can set this to a pause of 0.5 seconds. So now if we run the macro, it opens YouTube and it quickly pastes in our term in the search bar. Now again, you would probably want to use the wait for front browser to finish loading action instead of a regular pause action here, but just for the sake of example, I will leave it with the regular pause as is. Now finally, the last thing we would want to do is just press enter once we have that search term pasted into the search bar. And maybe I'll just increase this pause to 1 second to be on the safe side, but now I'll come back and maybe I'll select some text like this, and I'll run the shortcut Control-Option-Y. It opens YouTube, it pastes in the term, and it presses enter to search for it. Okay, now this is pretty cool. Let's try it with another term. Maybe we can search Microsoft Windows. So I'll press the shortcut and it opens YouTube and searches that in the search bar, which is great. So now we have a working macro, but let's think about how we can improve this. So that brings us to tip number 7, which is that you can use tokens within URL actions like this. So let me delete all these actions below the action that sets the URL. And let's think about how we can reduce the macro to just these 3 actions here. Now, if I come back to the YouTube search window, you can see the URL up top says youtube.com/results ? And then it says search query equals, and then it has the term that we wanted to search for, which is Microsoft Windows. Now we know that the search term is the thing that's in the clipboard because we copy it at the start of the macro. So what if we just set this to be part of the URL and then add the clipboard to be the very end at this part within the action? So again, up here, we copy whatever text is highlighted. And now all we would need to do is add it to this part of the URL, because we know that the beginning part of it is the URL to look for search results. Now, the way we do that is with a token. So one way that you can add tokens is by pressing this drop down here, and we can go to the clipboard, and the token we want is the system clipboard. So the system clipboard is the most recent thing that we've copied, which again will be set by this action here. So now let's test out this macro. So I'll come back to a page like this, and I'll press the shortcut, and now it opens that search term directly within the URL, and all the results appear below. So this is a great way to simplify the macro into fewer actions, and also to make it more reliable, since we don't have to wait for any web pages to finish loading or try to paste in our term manually into the search bar. We can just set it directly within the URL action and have it open that page immediately. So let me try it again on another term, and I'll run the macro, and you can see it successfully opens up that search term in the YouTube browser. All right, now that we have a working macro, let's talk about tip number 8, which is that you can actually add multiple triggers to a single macro. So we have it set to a hotkey trigger right now, but we can add another one. So for instance, we could add the status menu trigger, which will let us activate this macro from the Keyboard Maestro status menu. So if we highlight some text, I'll just do Mac OS again, and I come up to the status menu button and press our macro from there, then it will run it directly from the menu bar, and we don't need to use any keyboard shortcuts to activate it. Tip number 9 is that you can actually use custom images in the macro icon here. There is a way to build your own macro icons using the icon chooser, but you can actually paste your own images in if you want to get even more customized. So let's come back to YouTube, and if you press Command Control Shift 4, that will open up a window where you can take a screenshot that will be saved to the clipboard. So I'm going to grab the YouTube icon here, and now I will paste it, and you can see it gets pasted directly into this macro icon. So that's just a fun way to set custom icon images for your macros to make them more organized. Now, the final tip, tip number 10, is that you can rename actions to make them more clear or to give your macros better organization. So if you right click on an action and press rename, then it will allow you to change the name of that action up top. So we could say something like open new private window, and for the action below, we could say something like open YouTube with search term. So these actions are now renamed with some more descriptive names that will maybe make things more clear to us as we come back to this macro and wonder what each of the actions does. So this has been 10 more tips and tricks for Keyboard Maestro. The algorithm thinks you'll like this video next. Let's see if it's right.